Solomon Friedman joins me now from Ottawa. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You know, before your team acquired Pornhub's parent company, it had been through a very rough patch. A New York Times investigation found that Pornhub hosted child porn and non-consensual content. Dozens of women sued MindGeek shortly after that, saying that the company's profits off the exploitation of women. What made you want to buy a company with that kind of track record?
Well, what we did, obviously, before acquiring it was we took a very deep and comprehensive look at the nature of the company itself, right? We put aside what we had read in media, what I think all of us had read, and we went in to look for ourselves. You know, particularly with me, my background is criminal defense counsel. I took that job very seriously. And my focus was to look at the company as it existed at this point, right? We're talking about 2022 into 2023, and to look at what was it about, what was its values? And more importantly, what were its trust and safety processes like? And what we found, I have to say, you know, and I speak for the ownership team, you know, really surprised us that there was this massive gulf, this huge disparity between the public perception and the truth as we found it, which, you know, has now really been corroborated as the platform has continued to be a leader in trust and safety. We found a few things. First of all, the platform had implemented what's called the Verified Uploader Program, which means that no person can be eligible to upload content until their age, ID, and consent has been verified. They use both automated biometric means. It's then reviewed by human beings just to be able to be eligible to upload, right? And you imagine that in contrast to like a Facebook or a Twitter, where anyone can create an account with an email address or a phone number in some cases, and there's no accountability in terms of uploading content and ensuring age, ID, and consent. That was just a starting point. We then looked at the moderation program. This company employs a substantial team of full-time moderators. No content goes live on the platform until and unless it is reviewed and approved by moderators. Once again, compare that to the mainstream video sharing platforms or content sharing platforms. You know, nobody would use Facebook if they couldn't immediately upload, say, you know, a picture of their aunt's carrot cake. That doesn't happen on ALO's platforms. Full moderation is required. So when we saw this, these are processes that don't exist anywhere. Now, it's very interesting because in many ways, the rest of the internet, the rest of the social media world is starting to catch up as they're starting to understand the real need for trust and safety, for moderation, to keep abusive and hateful material off the platform. In our view, ALO is really ahead of the curve, and we saw great potential there. We saw great potential to use these tools that had been developed for trust and safety on platforms like Pornhub, to use them to assist law enforcement, to use them in assisting other platforms in scanning and detecting illegal content. So we saw a real diamond in the rough. It just required an examination of what was actually going on.
Adult entertainment carries a long-standing stigma of shame. How do you navigate that with one of the most recognizable brands in the industry?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, and I look at it as follows, and maybe I bring my legal background to this as well. Adult entertainment content is not only legal in Canada, it's also constitutionally protected. It's constitutionally protected, but what needs to happen is it has to be done right. And I think that when it's talked about openly, publicly, and transparently, and us as a new ownership group are very much willing to do that. We engage with media, we engage with politicians, we meet with regulators, we meet with law enforcement. Then that shame starts to dissipate, right? Shame comes from a place of stigma and silence, and the more open you are about it, and the more we can have really productive conversations. You can't have productive conversations about the future of regulation, about protecting young people, about protecting the vulnerable, about working hand in hand with law enforcement and advocacy organizations, unless you're willing to speak about it publicly. And that was a real sea change, I think, for the industry. And we're seeing the signs of that now, the benefits that we're able to have these open conversations. And in my view, for the benefit not only of the users, of the uploaders of adult platforms, but for the benefit of the internet as a whole.
The federal government recently tabled an online harms bill, part of which targets pornography platforms like Pornhub. You know, if passed, this would require sites to take down content like child sexual abuse material or content posted without consent. How does your company plan to meet those requirements?
So let me be clear about this. I do not see this as legislation that in any way targets legal pornography sites. It regulates them in a very positive way. In our view, by the way, just the first step in regulation. We already meet or exceed every single proposed piece of legislation that's contained in that bill, which is a number of pieces. We already report all suspected illegal content. We already take down material that is identified as being potential child sex abuse material. In fact, I'm proud to say that on the bottom of every single one of our pages on Pornhub and all of our content sharing platforms is something called a content removal request form. As of today, and this has been in place now for some years, prior to our acquisition even, as of today, any individual who identifies content as potential child sex abuse material or potential non-consensual intimate imagery, all they have to do is identify it as such, and it is taken down immediately pending review. And I want to be very clear about that. That's not a flag that we'll get to it when we get to it, not at all. This is take down first, ask questions later. There is more that needs to be done from a regulatory perspective. Our industry is not worried about regulation. Speaking on behalf of Ethical Capital Partners, we own ALO, the parent company of Pornhub, we welcome it. And we have been being very clear and active about this, speaking to politicians, speaking to regulators, that more steps are required in order to keep the internet safe.
Federal conservatives have also proposed requiring age verification on porn sites to prevent minors from viewing adult content. What are your thoughts on that? Because similar laws have already come into effect in several U.S. states, including Louisiana and Utah.
So obviously, we do not want any young people able to access our platform. Something else that I'm very proud of since the acquisition of Ethical Capital Partners. Today, when you go to Pornhub for the first time in Canada, before seeing any explicit content, you get a link immediately to our parental controls. We have made that front and center, but more has to happen. We support age verification that is effective at protecting children. Now, what has been proposed, in bills in other jurisdictions and in the private members bill in Canada, is age verification where individuals have to give their ID to millions of porn sites in order to access content. We know that's ludicrous. We know it doesn't work. We've tested it in other jurisdictions. We know that adults won't provide their IDs to pornography sites. They will simply go elsewhere. What we are supportive of, and some people are very surprised to hear the ownership group of Pornhub saying this, our view is that age verification has to be done at the device level. Let me be clear about that. It's our proposal that every device, and we're talking about devices made by Apple, Google, and Microsoft, the operating system manufacturers that can basically control access to the entire internet, should be blocked against accessing adults by default. The default when you have one of those devices is it can't access adults unless and until the user has verified their age on that device. Device-based age verification works. The technology is available today. We just need a little legislative will and social will to make it happen.
Mr. Friedman, appreciate your time. That is Solomon Friedman joining us from Ottawa.
My pleasure.